It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up. Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So, welcome to Reality Check with Craig Price. I am Craig Price, and this week, Roger Courville beams in to discuss virtual presentations. I hope you're doing well. When I think of all the webinars and teleconferences and Google Hangouts I've attended, first, I feel ill. Then secondly, my sense memory kicks in and I start getting groggy. Because they haven't always been pleasant experiences, and from what I've heard from others, it's a pretty universal feeling that online presentations can get pretty boring pretty quickly. But they don't have to be that way. Since it's still a new and growing medium, people are still going about these programs in a primitive fashion. But thankfully, Roger is here to talk to us about how we can improve virtual presentations and make them more palatable, because they're not going away. Hopefully they will evolve into something more enjoyable, or at the minimum, tolerable. But before we get to Roger, a quick reminder that you can subscribe to the podcast at iTunes. Please, if you can, leave a review. And if that's too much, just click 5 stars. I'd really appreciate it. Also, you can join the newsletter. Sign up at realitycheckpodcast.com, and you can get weekly reminders, previews, and other goodies right in your email box every Tuesday. And finally, you can follow the podcast at realitycheckpod as well. If you go there, you can also get the list of the podcast guest list, and you can get tweets from all our guests, so you can get more information than just what we get on the podcast. But enough plugging. Let's get virtual with this Skype conversation with Roger Courville. Every time I have someone on, I put it out there. Since we're friends on Facebook, you saw that I posted questions on Facebook for people to ask. And the first one right off the bat from my very own wife is, are there people who actually find webinars useful and informative? Because I don't know anyone that does. So there's a loaded question for you right off the bat, Roger. Answer that.
I love it. I love that question. I'll tell you why I love that question, because you know what? It's a lot like people who say, we love to complain about meetings and we love to complain about PowerPoint. Could there be a good PowerPoint deck, or could there be a good meeting? Well, absolutely. But yeah, the fact that so many of them are really lousy, I think I want to be totally empathetic. That's a great perspective. The question is, what's being done and how well is it being done? And if someone's not doing it very well, it's a waste of your time.
Yeah, and I've been a victim of a lot of poor webinars by professional speakers, even. Mm-hmm. I don't want them to be able to think that it's certain industries, which, yes, in my wife's instance, she works in oil and gas, that industry is going to be notoriously awful when it comes to online presentations. They usually have very technical engineer-type folks giving monotone presentations. In fact, she's actually been to a webinar, quote-unquote webinar, where the person, all they did was wait till everybody got there and then hit the play button on some recording, and that was it. So that's my first legitimate question. I did that one because I thought that was hilarious. First question. Is that?
Well, and you know what? I think that's entirely fair, because what we often don't see, we tend to apply old paradigms to new media, right? Until we kind of figure out the uniqueness of and how to optimize that new medium. And unfortunately, when we change medium, we tend, before we figure out what's cool and new and how to use the new medium, we tend to use it poorly. And unfortunately, most of the time we move online and we go, hey, what's the natural part of the best kind of meeting, training, keynote, seminar? I always start an analog, right? How are we going to communicate? And now how does the medium affect that? Unfortunately, we leave behind the handshakes and the networking and all of that, and we got a voice and we got some lousy PowerPoint, and that's the worst part of the whole process.
Well, when should you switch from a live presentation, and a lot of times it's optional, but when are webinars most effective? Let's get to the good things. Obviously, if you can't get everybody in the same room, but what is one of the most effective uses of a webinar?
Well, let's start with the term. I started analog. Are we meeting? Are we collaborating? Is this intended to be, think as a fellow professional speaker, what's the difference between a keynote speech and a training seminar? A lot, right? Well, so now let's move that into a new paradigm. If this was going to be a web seminar, a training scenario, what makes training great? Interaction. Even the word educate comes from the word educe, meaning to draw out. Doesn't mean pound in.
Dropping an educe on me. That is wow. You came prepared.
Well, so, for example, I think one of the most effective things we can do in a seminar is figure out where and how we can help people not just connect with you, but connect with each other, which may not be what you do, say, in your comedy routine or in a keynote speech. So I think the first and best use of that is to say, where and how can we be authentic human beings connecting with authentic human beings? And the first paradigm for the last 100 years is the telephone. It's a great tool. Yep. Perfect tool for every job? Nope. And now we can add an audio, a visual or video element and, frankly, interactive elements. And so I think the best time to use a webinar is when that live interaction is the thing that we need. Probably the time to avoid it would be in what you described, because there's a higher psychosocial cost for me to show up at Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. to listen to something that might as well have just been a recording, because in fact it was.
Yeah,
send it to me and let me use it when we get to it when it's convenient for me. Would be how I'd want to respond to that.
Now, when people think of online presentations, there's usually several different ways. There's a teleconference, which is still, I don't know why they consider that online, but I see a lot of people promote online teleconferences, yet they don't do anything on the computer. But it's audio. Then there's what you do is audio and visual. And then sometimes it's just pure chat. And I've seen it through Twitter or designated chat rooms where there's actual real-time chat. You can see them instantly. There's no hashtag needs. It's just it's a closed forum where people can interact.
Yeah.
So of those, are there certain tools that you need to be the most productive at an online presentation?
I like real-time human interaction. So something like Twitter or instant messaging comes really close, or like the online chat. And in fact, you may sit down and dedicate an hour to being there for a session, but it's still just minus some of the nuance that you and I have right now with our voice and how we respond and pace and pitch and pause and emotion and some of that. So the reason teleconferencing and web conferencing are getting blurry is because a lot of teleconferencing providers, instant teleseminar, now you can attend it on the telephone or voice over IP.
Yeah, and most people who use a telephone are using voice over IP. They just don't know it.
Yeah, exactly.
And for those of you who don't know, I am here with Roger Courville, who is the go-to person for virtual presentations, as far as I'm concerned, and several people who actually know these kind of things. Your whole business is about virtual presentations. In fact, you gave one this morning to Europe.
I did. I'm an inch wide and a mile deep on one topic. That's it.
That's the way to do it. And do you find that these kind of presentations, do they lose something in cultural context when you? Or is it just by an individual? Like if you are better, if you know Europeans, you're going to do well. But if you're like me, who think Europeans are just people who like cheese and drink wine and live across the ocean.
I like wine and cheese, and I live on this side of the ocean. Actually, that's an astute question, because it does actually put you into a place where you are more likely to have differences in culture. And frankly, culture isn't just geographic or countries. Sometimes that's company cultures as well. But that could be color. Red, a red on a PowerPoint slide is danger or stop in North America, and red in China means happy or wealthy. It could be dealing with an audience that may have English as a second language, or part of your audience with English as a second language, or calling it a lamp instead of a headlight, or not, realizing that a real football has two ends on it.
Did you say a real football has two ends on it? Oh, you're talking about NFL. when I think of football, I got onto the whole European thing. When you were talking football, I was thinking, soccer. I got into it. I wasn't trying to be one of these predisposed. Oh, it's American football. No, football. That's soccer. So you threw me on that one. So, do you find that the tools are becoming much more available that we have are good? Because I don't think that people are using them properly. One of the complaints that we got, also from my wife, that they're talking about when they get on these interactive sessions, a lot of mouth breathing going on by non-participants. Mm-hmm. My favorite one is when someone puts the conference on hold on their phone, and you hear the hold music because they're on the company, and everybody has to suffer through it while the person's trying to figure out how to mute them.
Yep. Actually, briefly, we had one when I was at Microsoft. One of our event producers had a client who insisted that all audio lines be open at the end of his webinar for Q&A. At which part of the way through, there was the sound of a woman in the throes of passion that entered the audio conference, and to his credit, the presenter stopped and said, "Well, at least somebody's enjoying themselves here."
I was going to say
going.
That just shows you can engagement on that level is probably impossible.
Yeah, exactly. But no, to point, very common that tools are underutilized or inappropriately utilized. Right? Like simple, mute yourself, unmute yourself. On cheap or inexpensive tools, you might not have the ability as the host to mute everybody. Whereas, a more sophisticated tool, a professional tool, which frankly doesn't have to be a lot of money these days, you deal with that by having a button and going, boom, now everybody's quiet.
Well, let's get into some of the tools that are available. I think one of the leaders out there that I've seen is the GoToMeeting or GoToPC. Mm-hmm. They're all the same company. What have you found to be is the most effective tool? Because now we have Google Hangouts, and in fact, we have a question about Google Hangouts, and you can do them with. There's all kinds of different ways you can do a virtual presentation. So, yes. What tools have you found to be the most effective, and which ones should we probably just kind of steer clear of?
Before we talk about vendors, let's talk about an approach. It's kind of like saying, what's the best car on the market? What should I buy? And if Greg says, well, I just need to get to 7-Eleven to buy some milk, a pickup or a minivan will do. As soon as you decide whether you're going to haul children or gravel, both will still get the job done. But the elegance of one versus the other emerges.
And when I think of gravel, I think of children. They're very similar. They just kind of lay around and cost money, and sometimes they can hurt.
And way down the back of the truck.
Yeah.
So here's where I'm going with that. All the web conferencing tools, and whether it's Google Hangouts or WebEx or Citrix or Adobe Connect, or literally there's one of 300 other tools, 300 different conferencing companies, they'll all do basic things like show video, or show your webcam, let you show your desktop or something like that, and deal with audio. Where they begin to differentiate themselves is in those finer features and the configuration of those features for a use case. For instance, when we are in a meeting, right, in a corporate sense, we tend to have reasonably co-equal access to sitting around a conference table, and we can speak, and you can speak, and I can speak. In a seminar, it's much more of one or few to many, right? So there was no audience orally talking back to me when I was talking to 700 people this morning in Europe, but it still didn't mean it wasn't interactive. But that modality has a fine distinction in terms of how the tools come together, and in this particular case, that was using GoToWebinar. And then trainers typically have some of the most complex sets of needs so that they can manage things that are kind of unique to what they do. For instance, very common in training is, a breakout group, or, hey, everybody, for the next 5 minutes, you're going to turn to the other people at your table, you're going to work on this, and then we'll come back together as a group and discuss it as a group. Well, you can do all of that technologically. You could take a conference of, a web conference with 30 people in it, break it out into 6 discrete groups of 5 web and audio video conferences, each within that are kind of operating independently, and then bring them all back together. Which one's best? Kind of depends on what you want to do. More often than not, people don't have the right tool for the job. For instance, somebody not being able to manage audio very well might not have the right tools at their disposal.
Yeah, and that's the one thing is I think everyone kind of goes to the one tool, which is why when I say to go to my meeting, which is the one I've seen the most, it seems like they rarely have the breakout sessions where people get into groups. It's really more of a lecture with the occasional question thrown in there to make it seem like it's interactive. And that's the other problem I've had with webinars and interactive presentations is that, and it's very similar to in real life, but you have a little more control over it, is you get questions of some of the most basic stuff first. They just inundate with all the simple stuff right away, and you're just sitting there going, please, we're talking about some very complex things, and you're wondering how you can adjust the volume on your computer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, most web conferencing tools don't have things like breakout rooms because, well, it's a more specialized thing. And frankly, most web conferencing companies build their first tool or their flagship tool to be oriented toward meetings because that's what most people do. 5 to 10 people, and we're all reasonably co-equal. If there's 5 people in the quote-unquote virtual room, I don't need to put up a poll because I can just talk to 5 people and get their opinion, right? With 700 people, you want them to vote, raise their hand, type stuff into chat so we can manage the questions, take the questions that are appropriate to the audience and that kind of thing. To your point, the common challenge is that we think of a webinar as a format. Web conferencing's a tool, it's a communication medium, but it's not a format for delivery, right? So the very common is, well, okay, we're going to talk for 45 minutes and then take Q&A for 15. One of the things I usually do is I actually open up Q&A right at the beginning to establish a different paradigm. Now, with a lot of people on the line, it's not audio Q&A, but I'll start dialoguing with the audience and responding to them, and when it's that many people, I actually become the voice of the audience, probably not unlike, a radio talk show host. And, Julie says this. Mukesh makes a good point. And we establish the fact that it's live and interactive right up front.
Yeah, and you're using other tools like either SMS, instant messaging, or Twitter, or something, a back channel, as they call it, to get that information? Is that something that's part of some of the tools that you use that's already built into the program?
Actually, all of the above. Those types of interactions are all built into the web conferencing tools. I also simultaneously use Twitter, and I respond to people live in real time on Twitter as well. So
let me get into that because to me that seems normal. I mean, I don't do it in my presentations because I tend to speak to older groups, and they don't know what Twitter is. They think it's a cute little picture of a bird when I put up my Twitter handle, and it's like,
why would I want to post what I had for lunch? No, exactly.
Yeah, but they don't even have. Sometimes the conference itself doesn't even have hashtags or an account, so I don't do that just because I would get 1 or 2 out of several hundred people, and that's kind of weird. But it is definitely a trend that is I think is a good trend. I know that they've had what they call the Twitter stream right behind them live, which can be a little dangerous, but if you can get it moderated, it's actually quite interesting, where the tweets are being shown in real time behind the speaker as they speak.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't mind because somebody can flame me all they want. I'll just respond to them because it doesn't bother me. But to your point,
but it may not be. But it may not be about you. It could be this conference sucks, and they don't really want the conference people don't want that up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a moderated one. So how can you do that and not get yourself distracted? I mean, what tools are you using? Because to me, to do that, I would need 3 different devices, 5 arms, and 6 pairs of eyes.
I'll tell you. Well, I mean, I got a lot of practice, but I always present when I'm in an optimum setting like my office. I present with 2 computers, and I will present from one, and I set the other one up as my dashboard. So I log in twice. I open up the questions panel. One of the things that prevents people from really even, let's just stay in the web conferencing and then we'll move to Twitter. One of the things that prevents people from dialoguing in real time is that you have to go hunting into a menu for the chat or the questions, right? Which is why we talk, and then we go look at the questions, and that feels unnatural. I open up a big questions panel, so the minute Craig types something in going, yeah, you said this, but I can respond and say, well, yeah, Craig, I agree, and we can respond in real time. When I do that, I actually open up TweetDeck to and position it on that second computer screen so that I can see both of them at the same time.
Now, the one thing that I did AV for hotels when I was younger, and it taught me a valuable lesson about technology and its dependency.
That's right.
So when I go to present, I do use PowerPoint because I'm one of the few people that don't, like yourself. I don't believe that it's bad PowerPoint. That PowerPoint is bad. I believe there are bad PowerPoints, and if you use it properly, it can be a very effective tool. But I learned right away not to do a lot of audio because every system is different and every computer is different. So it could be at a 98 volume on one machine and be breaking the speakers, and it could be 98 on another laptop and you can barely hear it. And so that variable is so scary. How can you maintain consistency, and what do you do for redundancy and for emergency?
I've got business class internet in my office. When I present, what I do is I use the first machine and I plug in a voice over IP headset via USB. Being a fellow audio guy, USB has got a better responsiveness and bandwidth than the typical telephone. I will also dial in my desk telephone and put it on mute just in case the internet has a bad hair day. Always recommend a hardwire internet connection. And fortunately, in the web world, most of the vendors, including all the pro ones who I work with, they all deal with that audio stuff pretty well, largely because of how they slightly compress the sound, and you just deal with some inconsistency. What you can't do in the online world, of course, is deal with the last mile of internet connection, which is the least reliable part of the whole process. If somebody's local ISP has a bad day, there's not much you can do about it.
Right, and if you have business internet and you're maxed out and it comes out amazing, and you're beaming into a Red Lion hotel, not that the Red Lion's bad, but since I did work for them, I can tell you that their internet connection was awful.
They all are.
Yeah, so it's really not. Sometimes it's really not about your setup; it's about the receiving end. So we're talking about conferences in this case, but also individuals. So do you do a lot of beta testing on your off time? I mean, if you know there's going to be a big webinar or a big conference, or you're going to do a big presentation, do you do it like the day before, or do you set up a couple hours in advance and run tests on it to make sure everything's going great?
Yeah, a couple different scenarios. Like many of us, I've done things like made a keynote speech to a conference in Sydney, Australia, without leaving my office. And one of the things that I always add to my checklist, not unlike the other things that we have on our checklist of speakers, is making sure they have a hardwire internet connection. I actually demand it because they think their bandwidth is fine, and then 400 people decide they're going to log in with their iPhones, and now it's awful. Second thing is, depending on the technology being used, I always want somebody on the other end who's got some literacy there, which could be pretty basic, meaning we're going to use Skype. More often than not, I'll use GoToMeeting or WebEx or something like that. And I want someone on the other end for two reasons, not for technical reasons, but for logistical reasons. Are we going to, how do we test it in advance? I want somebody there who I can kind of be the director of. Number two, are we going to take a second PC and turn the camera around to the other side so I can see who's on the other end? Three, how are we going to manage questions? Right? How am I sitting here going to hear that conference? It's actually more difficult to do it that way than having everybody have their own individual PC connection, but can be done, but gives you a couple extra things to think about. On occasion, you know what, they only have wireless, and you do what you got to do.
How do you get the interaction? Because I know that some people, when they log on, it doesn't matter if it's a conference, but we'll say it's you're doing a one-shot seminar. Mm-hmm. And individuals are going to be logging in from wherever around the world, so the technical issues we're not really worried about. But how can you get that good interaction? Because I feel a lot of people get on there and then lurk, which is just kind of hang out and listen and not really participate. So how can you get some of the quality folks? Because I find most people who participate are the clueless ones.
Well, not unlike being in an in-person room where, somebody sits in the front row and talks too much, and somebody sits in the back row and won't make eye contact. You got that same thing. Got the same thing online. I think one of the biggest challenges to overcome is actually what we already talked about, which is the expectation that has already been set by all the crappy marketing webinars that they went to on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday morning, where, frankly, they would never know if I was sitting at my desk because they never even asked me to participate in anything. That's the predominant paradigm. So people show up expecting that it's going to be listen only. They put it on audio, and they're going to get some work done on email while this thing plays in the background. There's only two things you can do. One, set a very different paradigm right up front before you have the very opening sequence of actions of whatever it is that you do. And the second thing is be engaging to and I don't mean be engaging like push a poll at them. I mean, you got to bring it. You got to go to 11 in Spinal Tap terms, because you can carry the day with your voice and how you do it, but you got to do it.
Yeah, my wife says that she has to sometimes fight to not fall asleep during them, and I'm thinking she is a conscientious. She goes to school, as well at night. I'm watching her watch these horrible. You think webinars are bad? Educational videos are worse. But she's paying attention. She's doing and taking notes, and she's real conscious. She would be the best kind of person you would want for these things. And she's telling me she's fighting off sleep. And it's all content related. What kind of tricks or tips or suggestions do you have to get people to bring it up to that 11?
Let's start with the opening interactions. I actually do something even before the webinar starts that kicks it off. So what's the typical webinar do? Hello and welcome everybody today to Craig Price's How to Do Comedy when you're blasted out of your mind, and then we go through a whole bunch of housekeeping.
Who is paying for that? Who is paying for that conference? 'Cause that is the biggest waste of money I've ever heard.
I know. I actually open it up early. So as people are filing into the virtual room, I say, hey, imagine, there's a guy standing at the front door of the in-person seminar you're walking into, and he's got this silly-looking face, and he's saying hi to people. Well, that's me. So let's talk. And they'll start, typing in, and I'll say, where are you from, or what'd you have for lunch, or this morning it was like, hey, Josie in Wales, and somebody else, and then a gal named Rebecca said, hey, anybody else in Holland? Now, they're all just chatting to me. Right? So I'm responding going, hey, Rebecca says, anybody else in Holland? And some other guy whose name I couldn't pronounce said, yeah, I'm in Holland. So that was before it even started. Once we actually got in, I actually start off by saying, okay, would you give me some feedback to let me understand kind of where you're coming from? In this particular case, it was a fairly generic kind of thing. And I'm like, what's your experience with online meetings, presentations, et cetera? And, the answers were everything from, never done it a little bit, I do it a lot, and in typical humor, right? The small, big, or big, small, right? I mean, I got a funny response in there, like, I'm so freaking awesome, I should teach this course. And, does everybody participate? Nope, but that's true in in-person audiences too. But finding some way to break the ice, figure out that there's a real human being connection. Now, that can be a tool like a poll. It can be using chat. It can be turning over a tool. It very much depends on if there's 25 or 250 people. And number two, whether or not they have direct access to the tools. So that's a big difference when everybody's sitting at their own computer and they can type in and you can respond, as opposed to that other scenario where I'm presenting and they're projecting it on a screen to a conference room and they don't have any ability to do something like that.
Well, and this leads right into the question that I got online about tools. Google Hangouts is like the latest, greatest tool for interactive meetings. I wouldn't say necessarily conferences, but you could definitely use it. I know people have used Google+. Their question basically is, what is your opinion on using Google Hangouts and broadcasting? Because I guess you can do that now. You can broadcast live on YouTube and embedding it on your site. Like if you're going to give a conference to 700 Europeans, do you also broadcast that on your site to get more people if the conference allows that?
Depends on the tools. you know what? If that suits the way that you want to connect with, one, your fellow presenters, and two, how you want to broadcast it out. But I don't do personally a lot of broadcast just because of the nature of what I do and who's hiring me to do it. Because broadcast, whether it's television or over the internet, is pretty static, right? We know that people multitask through television shows, and it's not terribly interactive. Now, there are tools that can. Here's one that's actually kind of an interesting twist. A company called Spreecast, Spreecast, where it actually integrates really tightly with Facebook, and if you want it to go viral, you can, people log in, and it's a killer. It's a killer tool.
And that brings the video into Facebook so people can watch it. Now, is that live, or is that clips, or is that?
All of the above. You and I could do the same as if we were doing a Skype chat, but now we, now it's got these other hooks and connectors to making it viral or a little more interactive or being able to make that accessible to other people.
The last question I have, because time's flown by. We're already in our 27th minute. A lot of people don't understand that why they don't get as much attendance at their webinars as they thought. And is there certain times that they should be doing them, or not doing a webinar? I mean, obviously you don't want to do a 7 a.m. webinar.
The webinar industry tends to hit peaks on, as you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning, because that's when the bulk of business traffic is driving them. One always starts with your audience, right? If yours is a business to consumer audience, you might find it easier to do it at 6 p.m. because you're kind of catching people after work. One of the tactics that I love would be to start using an extra question in the registration process and start polling your audience and figuring out what works. I did that for a European client once and actually found that 1 out of 5 people wanted to do it on Fridays, and when we dug into the data a little more, it was mostly salespeople. That's their down day relative to training and learning and development people that wanted, Wednesday or Tuesday. Marketing is always, of course, about what message do I put in front of what audience at the right time to get them to take an action, whether that's downloading your ebook or signing up for your webinar. You get that same kind of process. The one thing I would do is always make sure that if you're going to be live, especially if you're going to be interactive, pitch that as an explicit benefit. I mean, explicit benefit. Hey, when you come here, you're actually going to get time with Craig Price, the man, that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get out of reading his book or listening to a DVD or something like that.
Well, I think that might be more of a deterrent at this point. But I think you will not have to talk or look at Craig Price. I think that we probably get more people in droves that way. Now, what is the one thing that people are constantly doing wrong in webinars but it seems to be a standard? Because, I mean, there's a lot of things people are doing wrong. And I know that you know how to do the right things. Last thing before we go, I want the one person who's got a webinar coming up that they've got to do or they've got to attend, that they always do the wrong thing. And so they're going to eliminate that from their horrible toolbox.
I would start with figuring out how to be more interactive. And that's kind of a loaded word, and we've talked about it a lot, but here's kind of the paradigm. On one end of a scale, I want you to think about what we charge, what a public speaker charges, right? You hire a good speaker and they charge you, pick a number, $5,000. On the other end, you could buy a DVD of that same speaker for $50, right? That's a 100-to-1 ratio in terms of the perceived value. The next time you do a webinar, which experience do you want to be closer to bringing? Is your webinar going to be more like watching a DVD? Is it going to be more like having a live, authentic experience with other human beings? I'm not saying it's the same because it's through a different medium, but it is possible to create a whole hell of a lot more value, and it starts with connecting people to people.
Well, I know that all your presentations are highly recommended. They're very interactive, very enjoyable, which is rare. If people wanted to hire you to teach or coach their trainers and how to do better presentations, or if they wanted you the man to give a presentation, where can people find you?
thevirtualpresenter.com.
Once again, a big thank you to Roger Courville. If you have any comments, questions, or more importantly, guest suggestions, please email me at craig@speakercraigprice.com. Feedback is always welcome, and the more I know about who and what topics you want to hear about, the more I can try to give you, the valued listener, what you want. Feel free to like the page on Facebook or listen to us on Stitcher. Until next week, thanks for listening.